Come on, man.
Looks like we got us another hit. Yep.
What is NLRB is what we're talking about here. You know, what is NLRB? Why do we need it? What is happening with NLRB and takeaways? So I'll put together this little PowerPoint for y'all. Power Communications. It says, if you didn't know, the NLRB is an independent federal agency enforcing the National Labor Relations Act, which guarantees the right of most private sector employees to organize, to engage in group efforts to improve their wages and working conditions, to determine whether to have unions as their bargaining representative, to engage in collective bargaining, and to refrain from any of these activities. It acts to prevent and remedy unfair labor practices committed by private sector employers and unions. Yeah, so sometimes unions are shady, you know, and sometimes the private sector is shady. So this is like the government trying to play the middleman with this type of situation. And, it's been a lot of gains lately with the labor unions. What is it? UNRWA. They've made some gains. The big three made concessions. And just recently, I want to say this week, the Volkswagen plant that's here in the United States chose to unionize. And it was crazy because they were talking about this, and it was like all of the other Volkswagen plants were unionized, but they were all outside the United States. It was like really interesting that there's one plant of Volkswagen that's not unionized, and it's in the United States. Like, go freaking figure. I think that people need to recognize what be happening. There was a post Doc sent me, and I was thinking about it, and it was talking about the minimum wage, and the guy in the clip was saying that. Did I share that? The guy in the clip was saying, it makes me. It lessens me or whatever. It makes my labor have less value when you give $20 to someone who just entered the workforce or whatever. I'm gonna get sidelined by this. I'm gonna go on to the rest of these slides, and then I'm gonna come back to this. Where did I share it? Can I share this? Can I share this? I don't know. I think I shared it. I'm not sure though. Next slide. It says more about NLRB. Congress enacted the National Labor Relations Act in 1935 to protect the rights of employees, to encourage collective bargaining, and to curtail certain private sector labor management practices, which can harm the general welfare of workers, businesses, and the U.S. economy. The National Labor Relations Board has 26 regional offices and is headquartered in Washington, D.C. Regional offices investigate and prosecute alleged violations of the Act under the authority of the General Counsel. Why can't I make this go away? The board has 5 members and primarily acts as a quasi-judicial body in deciding cases on the basis of formal records in administrative proceedings. Board members are appointed by the president to 5-year terms, and with Senate consent, the term of one member expiring each year. So they're saying that, the board is quasi-judicial body, and it has to have Senate consent for the board members. So it's like it's a government body. More about NLRB. It says the General Counsel, appointed by the President to a 4-year term, is independent from the board and is responsible for the investigation and prosecution of unfair labor practice cases for the general supervision of the NLRB field offices in the processing of cases. The division of judges, dockets, heirs, settles, and decides unfair, hears, settles, and decides unfair labor practices cases through the country. So that's what their job is. That's what they do. They have a judge and they deal with unfair labor practices throughout the country. The National Labor Relations Board is proud of its history of enforcing the National Labor Relations Act, starting in the Great Depression and continuing through the World War II and the economic growth and challenges that followed. The NLRB has worked to guarantee the rights of employees to bargain collectively if they choose to do so. The NLRB applies to most private sector employers, including manufacturers, retailers, private universities, healthcare facilities. The NLRA does not apply to federal, state, or local governments, employers who employ only agricultural workers, and employers subject to the Railway Labor Act, interstate railroad, and airlines. So it doesn't pertain to airlines, agricultural workers, and government employees. So that's kind of interesting. The reason why I wanted to cover this is because I think that a lot of people don't even know that this type of thing even exists, like it's even a thing that that there is a government body or there is a place you can go to help you deal with disputes related to unfair labor practices. And I think it's not a coincidence that we don't know that this exists. Your employer doesn't want you to know that there's a place you can go to mitigate unfair working conditions and so forth and so on. So it says how this affects you. It says, I believe that my rights have been violated. How do I file a charge with NLRB? Charges must be filed in a regional office, usually with the help of an information officer. Within 6 months of the occurrence, the regional office will investigate the charge and if found meritorious, will issue a complaint. It says, how do I start the process of an election to bring in a union or decertify an existing union? To start the election process, a petition must be filed with the nearest NLRB regional office showing interest in the union or interest in decertifying the union from at least 30% of employees. NLRB agents will then investigate to make sure the board has jurisdiction and there are no existing labor contracts that will bar an election. So this is the process that you would go through, whether you weren't happy with the situation at your job or you weren't happy with the unions at your job. More ways it affects you. What are the rules governing collective bargaining for a contract? If a union is selected as the representative of employees, the employer and union are required to meet at reasonable times to bargain in good faith about wages, hours, and other mandatory subjects. Even after a contract expires, the parties must bargain in good faith for a successor contract or the termination of the agreement while terms of the expired contract continue. It says, do I have to pay union dues if there is a union at my workplace? That's a good question. The question of union dues is subject to federal and state laws and court rulings. The NLRA allows unions and employees to enter into agreement that require all employees in the bargaining unit to pay union dues. However, 27 states have banned such agreement by passing a so-called right to work laws. Yeah, and we're in Texas, and that's a state that has those right to work laws, which is kind of crazy. And I don't see how anybody can be like, it's kind of like paying taxes, for the greater good or whatever, and then you're like, I want the good that comes from being in the union, but I don't want to pay the dues, Those dues go a long ways when it comes time to strike so that you can still get some of your wages and be able to pay your bills while you're on strike. It says, is it legal to strike or picket an employer? Strikes and picketing are protected by the NLRA under certain conditions and to varying degrees. For important information on the rules regarding strike activity, see the Right to Strike page. A union cannot strike or picket an employer to force it to stop doing business with another employer who is the primary target of a labor dispute. At work sites with more than one employer, such as a construction site, picketing is only permitted if the protest is clearly directed exclusively at the primary employer. So you got to be clear about who you're striking with. And if you're like government or a university or something, you're not going to be able to do that. So the nitty gritty, the reason why I'm covering this, it says, what is happening? Elon Musk is suing to stop the government from enforcing labor laws. The Supreme Court might agree with him. So it's a case going through the courts to fight against this NLRA deal. And they're saying that it's unconstitutional. It says Amazon.com Inc. has become the latest corporation to defend against National Labor Relations Board charges by alleging the agency is unconstitutional. Joining Elon Musk, SpaceX, and grocery chains Trader Joe's. So those are the ones that are, those are big boys in the thing. Amazon, SpaceX, Trader Joe's, all trying to, and you know, these people they have money. These corporations have money, so they're going to have the best lawyers. And then they got a friendly to business Supreme Court. So even if the lower courts, you know, kick it out, if it somehow makes it to the Supreme Court, I really wouldn't be surprised if the Supreme Court sides with these corporations. It says the online retail giant lodged its constitutional claims in its response Thursday to an amended complaint from the NLRB's Brooklyn regional office accusing the company of violating federal labor law. Amazon's filing signals that companies facing unfair labor practice charges will continue to contest NLRB's constitutionality until there's a definite ruling from federal courts. So that's what's happening with that. Yeah, so basically, this is a government deal that came out since, what was it? Oh, snap. World War II, I think it said. 1935. Ever since 1935, we've had this in, you know, going. And now you have these major corporations are trying to get it up out of there. So that's the situation. And they won't say that it's because of that it helps Black and brown people